I thought catching my wife in bed with another man was the worst day of my life. I was wrong. The worst day was when she tried to kill me. Most marriages end with a signature on a piece of paper. Mine ended with a 12-year prison sentence. Here is how I survived. I'm a 34-year-old man, and for 6 years I was married to a 33-year-old woman named Brittany. When we met, I honestly believed I'd found the person I could build a quiet life with. The kind of quiet I never had growing up. We connected through Instagram. Messages that turned into calls, calls that turned into dates. And because of my past I didn't rush. I'd watched my parents' marriage rot from the inside, watched love turn into something loud and sharp, so I studied Brittany the way you study a road before you commit to the drive. How she handled stress, money, disappointment, people who couldn't offer her anything. She seemed kind. Steady. We got married, bought a suburban house, and for a while it felt simple in the best way. Then, around the 2-year mark, the temperature changed. Arguments started showing up like clockwork. Big fights over tiny things, constant blame, constant tension. I suggested couples therapy because I wanted to fix what was breaking instead of pretending it wasn't. We went once. The therapist barely began talking about healthy conflict before Brittany dissolved into tears, accused the therapist of attacking her, and told me I was trying to make her look unstable. Later I learned her father had died not long before her anger really erupted, and I tried to give her grace for grief, but she refused help and refused honest conversation. Some nights she screamed so loudly our neighbors called the police because they thought someone was being hurt, and afterward she'd act like it was just weather, like the noise had never happened, like I was ridiculous for still trembling. Over time we stopped being a couple and became 2 people sharing a schedule. We ate in front of the TV. We slept in the same bed, but it didn't feel like the same place. Sometimes we'd have sex the way you do something out of habit, and afterward the distance felt even louder. I told myself this was marriage, work, patience, endurance, and that, for better or worse, meant I stayed, even when I felt lonely in my own house. Still, I loved her. I kept holding on to the early version of us like it was proof the present wasn't permanent. Then came the week everything ended. I work a corporate job that sometimes sends me out of state. That week I was at a business expo for a few days when an issue hit back home, and my supervisor ordered me back early. On the way from the airport I had a hopeful idea. I'd surprise Brittany, remind her of us. I stopped at a florist and bought her favorite flowers, purple orchids, and I grabbed champagne and chocolates, like romance could patch what months of tension had torn. I pulled into the driveway around 2 p.m. Her car was there. She worked from home on Thursdays. Inside the house, her favorite playlist was blasting. 2 wine glasses sat in the sink. My brain tried to explain it away. Friend over. Quick lunch. Anything but what it was. I walked upstairs with flowers and chocolate in my hands, and before I reached our bedroom the sounds underneath the music told me the truth. I still opened the door anyway, because denial is stubborn, and hope is sometimes just another form of blindness. Brittany was in our bed with a man I'd never seen before. The orchids slid out of my hands and hit the floor, petals scattering. The man scrambled for his clothes and tried to rush past me like I was the stranger in the room. Something hot and automatic surged through me and my hand went to his throat, not to kill him, not even to hurt him badly, just to stop him, to make him face what he'd stepped into. I shoved him back and slapped him twice, open-handed, more humiliation than violence, and he stared at me with this offended rage that made my stomach turn. Then Brittany adjusted herself like she was getting ready for an ordinary day, looked at me in the mirror, and said, irritated, "Why are you even back?" No apology. No panic. No shame. Just annoyance, like my presence was the problem. I felt my fist clench so hard it hurt. I stepped toward her, grabbed her shirt collar, and for one terrifying second I wanted to do something that would match the pain ripping through my chest. And in that same second, I saw my father flinch in my memory, saw the look on his face when my mother's anger turned physical, and I realized I was standing on the edge of becoming the man I swore I'd never be. So I let go. My hands shook as I backed away. Brittany followed me into the hallway, yelling that this was my fault, that I should have called before coming home, that months ago she'd brought up an open relationship and I'd said no, so what did I expect? She wanted me to explode, to give her something she could use, something that would let her rewrite the story with herself as the victim. I didn't give it to her. I grabbed my keys and left the house that suddenly felt poisoned, drove until I ended up at my friend Ryan's place, and sank onto his couch like my bones had turned to sand. Ryan poured a drink, sat beside me, and listened while I told him the short version, because the long version felt like it might choke me. When I finally stopped talking, Ryan didn't give me motivational quotes. He just said quietly, "You need a lawyer. And you need to document everything, because she's going to try to twist this." I nodded, staring at my hands like they belonged to someone else, because the strangest part wasn't the anger, it was the grief, the realization that the life I'd been protecting was already gone. And then my phone started lighting up with Brittany's name. The first message from Brittany came 5 minutes after I sat down on Ryan's couch. At first it was the usual kind of chaos, the kind you expect from someone who just got caught doing the one thing they swore they'd never do: rage, blame, insults that felt rehearsed. Then it shifted into something colder, something meant to carve. She started sending long paragraphs about how unhappy she'd been, how I'd failed her, how I should have seen this coming, how she'd tried to do things the right way, which in her mind meant asking once, half drunk, about an open relationship months earlier and then treating my no like a permission slip to betray me anyway. And then the messages turned cruel in a way that made my stomach go hollow. Not just, "I don't love you." Not just, "You're boring." But detailed, deliberate humiliation, graphic comparisons, the kind of language someone uses when they want to ruin you in the one place that feels private, the one place that's supposed to be safe. It was less about sex and more about power, about making sure that even after she'd broken the marriage, she could still reach inside me and break something else too. Ryan didn't flinch. He just leaned in, saw my face, and said, "Screenshot. Now. Everything." So I did. I took screenshots until my hands cramped, and as I did, I watched the little bubbles disappear one by one, the messages vanishing in real time as Brittany realized she'd been stupid enough to put her own cruelty in writing. The speed of it was almost impressive, like watching someone wipe fingerprints off a weapon. She tried to reverse the entire reality of the day with a few taps of her thumb, as if deleting words could delete what she'd done in our bed. But the images were already saved. That night I didn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, reliving the moment I opened that door, hearing the music upstairs, seeing the orchids on the floor like a crushed apology. I kept thinking about the version of myself that almost snapped, the fist that almost turned me into someone I'd hated my whole life, and the strange, sick gratitude I felt that I'd stopped. Because if I'd hit her, if I'd given her even one bruise to point at, she would have worn it like a crown. The next morning I started calling divorce attorneys. Some sounded bored, like they were ordering lunch while I described my marriage collapsing. Some demanded retainers that made my eyes water. Eventually I found Daniel, a man who spoke in calm sentences and didn't treat my life like paperwork. When I showed him the screenshots, his expression tightened in a way that told me he'd seen ugly before, but not this particular flavor of it. "We'll use what we can," he said. "And you do one thing for me, keep your emotions off the record. Be clean. Be steady. Let her be the mess." Serving Brittany was its own small war. She dodged the process server like it was a game, changing her schedule, refusing to answer the door, having her mother claim she'd moved away. The whole thing felt unreal. This grown woman who'd once stood beside me in vows and photos now hiding like a teenager who'd broken curfew. When she was finally served, she took every possible day to respond, every possible hour to delay. Because delay costs money and Brittany knew exactly how to make someone bleed without ever touching them. And she became petty in a way that was almost methodical. She couldn't find bank statements she absolutely had. She forgot forms, showed up late, demanded we inventory everything in the house down to the last spoon, as if she could turn our marriage into an endless list and exhaust me into surrender. Through her lawyer she made offers that weren't offers at all. Half of my retirement, the house, alimony, after I had walked in on her with another man. It was like watching someone burn down a home and still demand the deed. I tried to move on in the most shallow, desperate way possible. I downloaded the apps, told myself that this was what healing looked like, that if I could put my body somewhere else my mind would follow. I met women, went on dates, had a few nights I didn't want to think about afterward. But every morning I woke up feeling emptier, like I tried to fill a deep wound with something that couldn't even reach it. I realized something simple and quietly devastating. I wasn't built for that kind of numbness. I wasn't trying to win after Brittany. I was trying to feel human again. One Saturday, instead of swiping, I went downtown and walked into a small independent bookstore. It smelled like old paper and dust and something comforting, the way kitchens smell when someone is cooking and you don't even know what it is yet, you just know it means you're not alone. There were cats sleeping in the windows. Wooden floors that creaked like they remembered footsteps. I stood in the sci-fi section feeling ridiculous, because I used to read constantly before marriage and overtime and stress turned everything into survival. So I stood there staring at titles that sounded like a different language, and then I heard a soft laugh beside me, not mocking, just warm, like she'd caught me having a small, harmless crisis. I turned and saw her holding a book so thick it looked like it could be used as self-defense. She smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't demand anything from you, and asked, "Do you need help, or are you doing the brave thing where you pretend you totally know what you're looking for?" I laughed, surprised by the sound of my own laugh, and told her the truth. I didn't know where to start anymore, but I wanted something good. Something that could pull me out of my head. Her name was Sophie. And she didn't just recommend a book, she talked to me, really talked, like the conversation mattered. She explained modern sci-fi the way someone explains a favorite song, with bright eyes and little gestures, tucking her hair behind her ear when she got excited, leaning in when she wanted to make a point. We sat in a corner and talked for 2 hours, drifting from space operas to classic authors, and for the first time in months my mind wasn't trapped in a courtroom or a bedroom or a text message. It was just two people and a shared language. When I asked for her number, my hands shook like I was 19 again, which was embarrassing and also weirdly hopeful. That night our texts didn't feel like the performance dating apps had turned into. They felt real. And because they felt real, I knew I had to be honest before I let myself want more. On our first actual date, I told her I was in the middle of a divorce. I watched her face, bracing for the polite retreat, the "I'm not ready for that kind of baggage," the gentle goodbye. Instead, Sophie took a sip of her wine and said, "Thank you for telling me. Everyone has baggage. At least you're carrying yours instead of pretending it isn't there." That was it. No interrogation, no pity, no shame. Just a simple acceptance that felt like someone opening a window in a room I didn't realize had gone stale. Over the next months, Sophie became the opposite of chaos. Not perfect, no one is, but steady in the ways that matter. She listened. She remembered little details. She didn't punish me for being tired or stressed. And when Brittany found new ways to drag the divorce out, Sophie didn't complain about being with a man who was technically still married on paper. She just sat beside me while I read Daniel's emails, and when my jaw tightened, she touched my hand like a reminder that not everything in my life was broken. For the first time in years, I started to feel calm. And that's the cruel trick of life. The moment you begin to breathe again is often the moment the past decides it isn't done with you. Because while I was rebuilding, while I was learning how to smile without forcing it, I didn't know Brittany had started watching from the shadows, turning her rage into something far more dangerous than paperwork. I didn't know that the divorce wasn't the worst thing she was willing to do. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind of afternoon that's supposed to stay ordinary forever. Sophie and I had spent the day the way normal couples do when they're starting to trust happiness again, shopping for nothing important, sharing lunch at a small cafe, laughing about a movie we wanted to watch later, and the whole time I felt that unfamiliar ease in my chest, like my body was finally learning that peace was allowed. We were walking back to her car in the mall parking lot as the sun dipped lower, the light turning everything soft and gold, and Sophie was mid-sentence, smiling in that open, unguarded way she had, when I heard an engine scream. It wasn't the casual sound of a car moving through a lot, it was the raw, aggressive roar of someone flooring the gas. And before my brain could even form a thought, my instincts turned my head toward it. The car was coming straight at us. For a fraction of a second my mind rejected what my eyes were seeing, because no one wants to believe that a stranger would aim a vehicle at two people walking beside a row of parked cars. But the angle was too direct, the speed too wrong, and the way it held its line told me this wasn't a mistake. I grabbed Sophie's arm and tried to pull her sideways, tried to move her the way you move someone away from danger in a dream where your body feels heavy, but I was half a second too slow. The car clipped her leg, and the sound that followed is something I will carry for the rest of my life, because it wasn't just a scream, and it wasn't just the crunch of impact, it was the horrifying moment where reality breaks and you realize a person you care about is made of bone and blood and fragility, and that fragility is being destroyed right in front of you. Sophie went down hard, and when I dropped with her, trying to shield her instinctively, I saw her leg bent at an angle no leg is supposed to bend, and she was crying in agony, her face pale with shock, her hands shaking as she tried to hold herself together. I reached for my phone to call for help, but then the tires squealed again. The car reversed. And in that instant, the truth landed in my chest like a stone. This driver wasn't panicking after an accident, they weren't trying to flee, they were backing up to try again. My heart hammered so violently I thought it might split my ribs, and I forced my body to move even as my mind screamed that this couldn't be real, that this couldn't be happening in broad daylight with people all around. I grabbed Sophie under her arms and dragged her, inch by inch, toward the narrow space between two parked cars, and every time she moved she cried out, pain ripping through her in waves. But I kept pulling because I knew the next impact would end us. The car slammed forward again, smashing into the row of vehicles, metal shrieking, alarms exploding into sound, and suddenly the entire parking lot turned into chaos. People shouting, running, filming, a storm of noise and panic, and in the middle of it all I crouched beside Sophie, one hand gripping her shoulder, the other bracing myself against the pavement, trying to become a wall between her and the world. Then the driver's door opened, and Brittany stepped out. She looked normal, which was what made it terrifying. Her hair was done, her clothes neat, her posture composed, as if she were arriving at an appointment instead of stepping out of a car she just used like a weapon, and for a second my brain tried to place her in the version of my life where she was just my soon-to-be ex-wife dragging out paperwork, not a person capable of this. But her eyes were different. They weren't the eyes of a woman caught cheating, or a woman screaming in a hallway, or even a woman trying to win a divorce. They were flat and furious at the same time, like something inside her had snapped and decided there would be no consequences if she just wanted something badly enough. She started walking toward us. Her heels clicked against the pavement in a steady rhythm, and I remember thinking, absurdly, that it sounded like a countdown, like the world was ticking towards something final. I held Sophie tighter and tried to keep my voice calm, tried to be the steady thing in her pain, because she was trembling and I could feel how hard she was fighting not to disappear into shock. A man built like a linebacker reached Brittany first, grabbing her and holding her back as she surged forward, twisting and straining like an animal against the leash, still trying to reach us, still trying to finish what she'd started. Police arrived, then an ambulance, sirens slicing through the air. As paramedics lifted Sophie onto a stretcher, she reached for my hand, squeezing my fingers with what little strength she had left, and even through tears she tried to give me a small, brave smile, like she didn't want me to drown in guilt on top of everything else. Brittany screamed while they handcuffed her, yelling words that didn't even fit the reality she had created, as if she were the betrayed one, as if she hadn't detonated our marriage with her own choices, as if she hadn't just turned a parking lot into a crime scene. I stood there with Sophie's blood on my hands from where I'd tried to help her, and something inside me went very quiet, because it hit me with sick clarity that Brittany had not only wanted to hurt me, she had wanted to erase the future I was building, to punish the fact that I kept living. At the hospital, the hours blurred into fluorescent light and antiseptic air, into doctors explaining surgeries and pins and healing timelines, into forms signed with shaking hands. When I finally told Sophie who Brittany was, I couldn't even look at her face at first, because shame has a way of making you stare at the floor like you might find a different life down there. I waited for her to say she couldn't do this, that she didn't sign up for someone else's madness, that she needed to protect herself. Instead, Sophie reached for my hand again and held it, her grip firm despite the pain, and she said, with that dark calm humor that somehow saved me, "So, your ex tried to turn me into a speed bump, and she still didn't even manage to scare me off." I started to apologize, too many words, too many times, until she cut me off gently and said, "Don't give her the satisfaction of taking more from you. She already took enough." That was the deepest human moment of the entire nightmare for me, because I realized love isn't just flowers and movies and easy laughter. Love is someone lying in a hospital bed with a shattered leg, choosing not to let cruelty win, choosing not to turn you into a man who only knows fear. The case moved fast after that. Security footage showed everything: Brittany circling the lot, waiting, aligning the car, accelerating with intention, reversing to try again. Witnesses came forward, phones full of video, statements full of detail, and the prosecutors didn't treat it like an accident that went wrong, they treated it like what it was: premeditated violence caught from multiple angles. When the verdict came back guilty, I felt no triumph, only a heavy kind of relief, like my body finally believed we might survive our own story. The sentence was 12 years. It wasn't the number I wanted, because when you see how close death can get, you start wanting guarantees the legal system can't give. But it was time, and time was safety, and safety was the first thing Sophie and I had truly needed. After the criminal case, the divorce became simple in a way Brittany had never allowed it to be before. In front of a judge, with the weight of what she'd done hanging over every argument, her demands fell apart, one by one, until there was nothing left to negotiate except the ending. Sophie healed slowly, stubbornly, with physical therapy and grit, and the kind of determination that makes you believe in people again. I moved out of the old place because I couldn't breathe inside those walls anymore, and we found a new apartment closer to the city, brighter, quieter, a bedroom that didn't feel like a graveyard for trust. One evening, months later, we went back to that same bookstore, and Sophie ran her fingers along the spines like she was greeting old friends, and I watched her walk, really walk, without a limp, without hesitation, and I felt my throat tighten because it hit me that we had both been broken in different ways and still chose to rebuild. Sometimes I still think about the orchids on the floor, about the man scrambling for his clothes, about the second my hand almost made me into someone I hated, and then I think about Sophie's hand in mine in that hospital room, and I remember that the strongest thing I did in this story wasn't fighting, it was refusing to become the violence I grew up with. And now, when Sophie talks about next spring and what kind of wedding feels right for us, something small, something real, I don't flinch from the future the way I used to. Because I learned the hard way that love can be destroyed by a person who doesn't respect it. But it can also be rebuilt by someone who does. Some stories don't end with apologies. They end with understanding. If this story felt familiar, you're not alone. Thank you for listening. This was Block Tales.